Well, happy International Women's Day, everyone. I think people are just joining in, and we're about ready to be able to start this webinar. So my name is Yasmeen Abu-Laban, and I am professor and the Canada Research Chair in the Politics of Citizenship and Human Rights in the Department of Political Science at the University of Alberta. And so on behalf of the Department of Political Science, as well as the Middle Eastern and Islamic Studies Research Group, I'm really delighted to welcome you to this noon hour discussion that we're having. Now, March 8 marks the day that the United Nations and many countries around the world, including Canada, have chosen to give recognition to the challenges and the achievements of women. And we thought this was an especially fitting moment to take time to celebrate a brand new book by Ghada Ageel and published by University of Alberta Press as the very first volume in a new oral history series entitled Women's Voices from Gaza. So the experience of Palestinians as a stateless population, and in particular Palestinian women in Gaza, has not really been well represented. And so Challenging This Gap is the first volume in this new University of Alberta Press series entitled A White Lie, Medhia Hafez Albata. So A White Lie brings to light Albata's story in her own words and from her birth in 1922 until her passing in 2011. It chronicles the hardships she faced and her many contributions, which included setting up the first schools for refugee children in Gaza. This book, as noted, is published by University of Alberta Press, and it's available on the University of Press website. And for those of you attending the lecture today, you can get it at a special discounted rate of 20% by using the code IU of A, all one word, IU of A. I didn't get that discount, but it was still worth the full price. So today I'm really delighted that Dr. Ghada Ageel, who edited A White Lie with Barbara Bill, is here to tell us more about the book. Dr. Ageel is a visiting professor in the Department of Political Science at the University of Alberta. She's a columnist in Middle East, for the Middle East Eye, London, and she's the editor of the volume Apartheid in Palestine, Hard Laws and Harder Experiences. She holds a PhD and MA in Middle East politics from the University of Exeter in the UK, and she holds a BA in education from the Islamic University of Gaza. Dr. Ageel's research interests focus on rights-based approaches to forced migration, Palestinian refugees in comparative perspective, oral history, the Arab-Israeli conflict, and the permanent status issues involved in the Middle East peace process. Her work has been widely published, and it includes publications in several newspapers and journals, such as the Washington Post, the Los Angeles Times, the International Herald Tribune, CNN, The Guardian, Journal for Palestine Studies, Palestine Chronicle, as well as many Arabic language newspapers throughout the Middle East. So today what's going to happen is Professor Ageel is going to speak for about 25 minutes or so, and then we will have time for questions. And in fact, you can pose your questions anytime using the Q&A function that you find at the bottom of your screen. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to Dr. Ageel.
Well, thank you so much, Yasmeen, for the introduction. And happy Women's Day. I'm really delighted that this book launch is taking place during this special occasion, and allow me a moment to recognize and salute all women in all parts of the world for their daily struggle to advance right, to defend freedoms and to seek justice. And I want also to seize this opportunity to recognize and salute Palestinian women who, through performing their assigned gender roles as life givers and as keepers of family traditions and as cultural bearers, have successfully protected the Palestinian identity and have successfully created, practiced, and continue to practice forms of resistance to generation of oppression. Thank you so much for our department for the invitation, as well as for University of Alberta Press for MEIS, Middle Eastern and Islamic Study Research Group, as well as CRC Canada Research Chair in the Politics of Citizenship and Human Rights. In the coming 25, 30 minutes, I hope to be able to talk about Women Voices from Gaza series, and give a little bit, this is first a project that took 20 years, and I don't know how I'm gonna summarize everything in this short time, but nonetheless, I'll try to provide a little bit of background about the project, the story behind it, its content. And I also hope to highlight the role, let's say the oral history as a methodology, as well as an extremely important tradition in Palestine, particularly after the Nakba. I hope to touch on some questions that are related to this series, including why Gaza, why Palestine, how I met Barbara Bell, my partner in this project. And I want to use the last 5 minutes to speak about A White Lie, narrated by Madiha Hafiz al-Batta, a woman with the width, the warmth, and depth of a homeland. However, before delving into the talk, allow me for 1 minute to introduce myself the way I see it. First and foremost, true. Yasmeen has introduced me in the professional manner. True, I am all of what Yasmeen have said, but above all, I am Badrasawi. I come from a village that called Bedras. My ancestral roots go back to this village, which is a small, tiny village that exists now in memory. Together with around 550 villages that has been demolished in the course of 1948 war. We call this the Nakba. So in 1948, Beit Daras, together with its orchards, orange, our citrus trees, olive trees, mosque, school, water well, the sycamore tree where my grandmother used to have a break during the middle of the day, having lunch with her friends while working in the field, together with the homes, with their aliyas, which is the room that is built on the roof of the homes made from palm trees branches and fronds to catch the breeze during the summer are no more. They have vanished. They have been erased when Zionist militia took over Beit Daras and took over Palestine. So we call this Nakba, which is the destruction of the Palestinian community and society and the expulsion of the majority of the people, around 800,000 people in statistics or in numbers. This is around 90% of the entire population of Palestine. So, and this explains why Palestinians are the largest refugee group in the world today. This Nakba / expulsion / ethnic cleansing has been followed by a systematic erasure of everything Palestinian. Israeli new historian Professor Alan Pape has used the term memoricide to explain the attempted annihilation of memory by the state, and particularly that of the Nakba, a process that included the erasure of history of one people, here is the Palestinian, in order to write that of another people over it. This included the erasure of all the traces of the Palestinian people and the renaming of the Palestinian sites and villages and towns. These practices were not secret. In fact, it has been recounted by the statement of Zionist leaders, including Moshe Dayan in 1968, who said, and I want to read the quote, "We came to this country, which was already populated by Arabs, and we are establishing a Hebrew, that is a Jewish state here. Jewish villages were built in the places of Arab villages. And I don't know even the names of these Arab villages. And I don't blame you, because the geography books no longer exist. The Arab villages are not there either. So in this context, memory becomes so crucial. It is deeply significant site of resistance to these policies of obliteration, policies of elimination, and policies of denial. It is a tool to be added to the arsenal of disenfranchised people and marginalized people. And in Palestine, such resistance and memory work takes place within families, and in particular through women. Stories of lost homes are handed down from generation to generation, repeated time and again, preserving the name of those lost villages and town, detailing former land holding, passing on deeds and recounting the traditions and tales about ancestors. Of, it's every day, everything related to the land. So for example, I am putting today the dress of that the embroidery of my village. So making sure that this tradition, this um, you know thing of identification, because if I put it, everyone would know I am from certain village. So when we asked, where are you from? If you ask any child in the refugee camp, whether in Palestine or outside Palestine, where are they from? They would tell you the name of their lost villages rather than the refugee camp where they have been born. So although my village, Beit Daras, is no more, vanished over the course of settler colonialism, it exists in the minds and the hearts of all Badrasawis. The same as the case of villages such as Sawafir, Beit Affa, Dimra, Ma'in Abu Sitta. They are no more on the world map, but they are in the heart and minds in all Abu Sitta's families. And they are, in fact, when I related to Ma'in Abu Sitta place, it is the place where the husband of Madiha family come from. So that was the mission of the old generation, particularly women who stepped in to close that historical denial. And to a large extent, they have succeeded in that mission. So the contrary to the prediction of David Ben-Gurion that the old generation would die and the young generation would forget, in fact, the story of our lost homes and villages has been, as I would say, our use the accurate words of Ramzi Baroud, it was like the daily narrative that defined our relationship as community. It defined our identity. So when I say I am Badrasawi, I am Sawafiri, I am from Sturt, I belong to that village that once used to exist before the destruction of the Palestinian community. So telling the stories, women, including my grandmother, they knew that they won't be able to return Beit Daras back to the world map. And they also knew that they won't be able to return those from the grave, those who defended Beit Daras, the little means they have at that point of time. But they wanted to make sure that Beit Daras is not exiled from the human memory. Ma'in Abu Sitta is not exiled from the human memory. So this project started in 2000. It was the time of the Second Intifada, the uprising and the brutality of the military occupation. It was also the time in which I felt, as many of my generation, the sense of powerlessness and sense of helplessness when your homes are attacked once again. Now the homes in the refugee camps, not in Beit Daras, from the air, from the sea, from the ground, bombarded by the Apache, and I find myself as a third generation Palestinian refugee, taking my son and flee for safety, looking for a safe place, knowing that there is no safe place in Gaza, and repeating the same thing that my grandmother has done back in 1948, when she carried my father and my uncle, and she expelled or fled or made her way to Ashdod nearby place, waiting till the conflict to settle so that she could return. It was also a time of intense coverage of the situation by the media. And I have been working at that point of time as interpreter and as fixer. And I was shocked by the ignorance of our history, the misinformation and misrepresentation, the bias, the lack of understanding to the root causes of this conflict, and the balance that journalists would like to try to do to please their bosses in London or in America or the audiences. And amid also that time, I started to navigate how I would challenge these policies of ongoing Nakba, policies of denial and obliteration. And the question that I faced, what could I do? I am no more a teenager, as was the case in the first Intifada, in which I could go and participate in demonstration and throw stones. I am now a mother with children, and I just graduated from university. And in fact, I graduated or I joined university 6 years when I was 24 years old, because Israel closed all the university as a means of collective punishment between 1987, the beginning of the first uprising, to the start of the peace process, 1993. So for 6 years, no single Palestinian in the Gaza Strip was able. So like tens of thousands graduating every year. So when I joined the university, I was together with my eldest brother and other four sisters, six of us in the first year of university. Very heavy job for my dad at that point of time. I was also not living in the refugee camp. Now I moved to Gaza city, to a place called Zahra, to be near my university and my work. And I started to work also as a teacher for foreigners who started to come to Gaza to learn Arabic. And I wanted to open a hole in this confined place where I live that keeps shrinking and making it impossible to lead a dignified, normal life. And even at that point of time, I was not able to visit my camp because of the checkpoint, and that Mediha talks a lot in her book. And my daughter was growing, and I am far away, socially cut from my family, although my camp is only 20 minutes from the place where I live. And my grandmother was aging, as all the generation of the Nakba. And I started to think, what should we do? So during that time, I met Barbara, my partner in this project, and she was working in one of those international organizations in the Gaza Strip. And she came to the center where I used to teach Arabic, and she became my student. So Barbara was amazed with the history of the place, with the richness, with the generosity of the people, with the beauty, and which clashes to a large extent of what she had learned in school in Australia. She's Australian, by the way, and also what the media reports. So our relation has started to develop initially as a teacher and a student, and eventually as scholars sharing the same passion for authentic Palestinian history, but also frustration over the reductionism in the way the world viewed and view Palestine and Palestinian. So we both started to record those stories, and to first to preserve the history from my point of view, and also to recognize women diverse experiences as key to decode history, but also to offer a new insight into the history of Palestine, and to enable readers to gain a fuller understanding of the scale of a tragedy experienced by the generation of the Nakba, and later on, of course, the generation born in the occupied territories, in the camp, and the socio-economic political impact it has. So now a little bit back to academia, just to try to define what is oral history as a methodology, and it's the role it plays in challenging the dominant discourse. So oral history, or history from below, is a practice that both enriches and subverts official / traditional / mainstream history. The concept was proposed by the French historian Georges Lavarre, who emphasize that history is made by ordinary people over extended periods of time. And in defending this method, Paul Thompson argued that recording oral history transmutes the account of history, and quote unquote, by shifting the focus and opening new areas of inquiry, by challenging some of the assumptions and accepting judgment of historians, by bringing recognition to social groups who have been ignored. Those voiceless social groups, or let me not use voiceless because no one is voiceless. All of us have voices, but we are silent by these systems of power, include indigenous people, refugees, immigrants, colonized people, and minorities, and other categories. And such groups have employed this methodology of oral history to counteract the dominant discourses that suppress their version of history. And furthermore, as Edward Said stated, oral history is a methodology that challenges the systems of powers, that reduces groups, reduces initiative, reduces aspiration by excluding these groups from international discourse. Not only that, but also labeling them with different negative stereotype. Think of the word refugee, what comes to your mind? Think of Palestinian, think of indigenous people, etc. So in efforts to present the totality of the truth, oral history has been recognized as a method of realizing the rights of marginalized people to own and sound a voice, to share and reflect on their collective experiences, and to resist the dominant colonial rhetoric that omits or obliterates these experiences. And in this context, Palestinians have used oral and visual documents to record experiences of colonialist disposition, as grand historian Rosemary Sayoc put it, and challenges the dominant Zionist and Western versions of their history. And because traditional history has failed Palestinians to a large extent, oral history practice has come to constitute the core of Palestinian historiography in the past 3 decades. So why women? Women accounts are particularly vital for comprehending the past and present in Palestine. In 1948 Nakba and its aftermath, women have endured by the whole of the Nakba has been endured by the whole society, but particularly by women who have borne the tragedy both on their backs and their hearts as they put up and organize tents to house their families after losing their lands and villages and homes. They have cared for and raised the children. They queued for hours to receive the United Nations and charity rations and handouts of clothes and blankets. And they have struggled to keep smiles on their own faces and those of their families and friends and neighbors to face this humiliation and bitter pain in the day-to-day practice of what Palestinians call sumud, the steadfastness. And I will talk about it when I relate to Madiha. But in this context, I still remember in vivid clarity when my grandmother used to take me as her eldest granddaughter to go with her to receive or to help her in carrying these ration that we used to receive as refugees from UNRWA. And when the line is so long during the hot days or the cold days, my grandmother would flip the basket, shopping basket, which made of a straw, so that she could make it a chair for the old people who cannot stand. And then she would urge all women, to do that, small acts of, steadfastness. And then she would ask me as a child and other children around us to dance or sing in order to amuse the old people who are, sitting there, just to kill the time, just to change the atmosphere. And, you know, at that part of time, I was enjoying it till I become a little bit old and become angry. And I realized how a trick and decided not to participate in that. But then nonetheless, um, I, so uncovering the details of women's life journeys under such exceptional circumstances reveals a version of Palestinian history that is not only far more complete, but that also acknowledge the central role of women the central role that women have played in making this history. So Madi has a story as well as all women's story, which is the white lie here when I say Madi had a story, brings in pieces evidences that characterizes the life and history then, and it challenges those who falsified the history by either taking the path of wholesale omission, cherry picking, or misrepresentation. So over the period of 3 years, we have interviewed 7 ordinary women, but especially sought those with variety of experience and a good memory who were thus capable of conveying the diversity and richness of Palestinian life. So as the majority of Gaza Strip are refugees, we talk about 75% of the population. So we picked 3 refugees, one from the south, one from the middle of the Gaza Strip, and one from the north. We selected Madih al-Batta to be representative of the indigenous people of Gaza, the people who received the refugees when 1948 tragedy destroyed the Palestinian society. We chose the character of returnee, the Palestinian who live in the Shatat, and you know some of them got the chance to return to Gaza after the peace process. So she would, present the suffering of Palestinian generations far from their homes. And then we also selected a Christian Palestinian, yes, a Christian Palestinian from Gaza to represent, the story lived, the history lived by this part and parcel of Palestinian society who used to represent at point of time, beginning of the 20th century, 20%, and now reduced because of these policies of obliteration and denial to less than 3%. And the last character was the villager, Basim al-Kafarna from the north town of Beit Hanun, and her connection to the land. So she lost her land in 1948, and the ongoing Nakba continue, and she would lose the last piece of land during the Intifada that took place in 2000, and she would die when she is looking for her land being uprooted, her trees, her olives. I mean, and especially for Palestinian and for villagers, I mean, trees are human being. I mean, it just part of life of the farmer and the villager, uprooting them as uprooting, the human being himself from the soil that he belongs to. So that was a little bit who were the characters of selected for these series. Why Gaza? The last point, because Gaza is very small, by the way, 1.5% of mandatory Palestine. I remember when I used to teach Arabic in that center, there was a child from Russia. She came to learn Arabic with her mother. And she told me, what is Gaza on the map? So I took her to the world map and I pointed, this is Gaza. And she said, I can't see it because my finger is big for Gaza. So I picked a pen and I said, look, this is, and she said, wow, it's a dot, because she was comparing it to Russia. I said, yes, it's a dot, but it's making all this noise in the news. So Gaza, this dot, 2 million people live there. 3/4 of them are refugees. And 5 generations of those refugees are living in the camp now. And the hardship, the misery, the statistics that speaks about them, you might be familiar of. So I'm not gonna go through it, but it's one of the most overcrowded places in the world now. It has been called a big refugee camp in 1948 when suddenly 200,000 people ended there. And imagine there was only 80 or 70,000 Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. And suddenly in 1948, Gaza hosted 200,000 refugees. There's all this influx of internal refugees. And now it's called the largest open air prison in the world. And in the last decade alone, Israel has attacked or waged 3 major offensives against Gaza. The last was in 2014, and now they are living this inhumane, illegal blockade that was imposed in 2006. And let me just read some statistics of number about that offensive that destroyed much of Gaza infrastructure and institution, including, just think of the number, complete or partial destruction of at least 100,000 homes, 62 hospitals, 278 mosques, and 22 schools. In 2012, United Nations reported, our report predicted that Gaza could be rendered completely uninhabitable by 2020. And this bizarre prediction is consistent with the notorious Zionist image of Palestine as a land without people. And this image has now transformed into one in which a piece of that land has become unfit for a human habitation when its inhabitants number far more than they have at any other point in history. Perhaps this uncomfortable contradiction represents the core of what we should say or what should be said about the recent history of Gaza in explaining the current irrational predicament of its civilians population. But put all these statistics, reports aside, Gaza history is far richer as Palestinian history as a whole and deeper than the standard narrative of helplessness or a humanitarian disaster or war story. So moreover, as the case with other post-colonial regions and their histories, Gaza history differs greatly from official accounts and Eurocentric based on oversimplification. This series, therefore, is an attempt to replace detached and sometimes questionable statistics with some of the concrete details of a crucial survival, resistance, complex human emotions, and specific difficult choices. Now, allow me in the last 4 minutes to speak about Madiha Hafiz al-Watta and her story, A White Lie. In fact, this story is a very powerful one and fits very well within the occasion of today because Madiha's spirit, Madiha's warmth, work, resilience, ability, optimism, strength, speaks volume about women's capabilities and contributions to the world even under very challenging circumstances. Her life story presents a model and demonstrates women will to stand fast and resist the odds. I mean, in every simple, small act that Madiha was doing, she was making a statement. Take, for example, when she had the first daughter, and everyone around her, let's say a first child, and happened to be a daughter, and everyone around her wanted her to have a boy, and they become a little bit frustrated. Madiha decided to name this girl Adala, which means in Arabic, justice, to bring justice to all the females and all women in the world. When her husband was speaking, now when we speak about optimism and strength and activism, he used to tell her, the grand Ibrahim Abu Sitta, rahmatullah alayh, may his peace rest, may his soul rest in peace, telling her that the first thing I like to see in the morning is your face, because you wake up smiling. When Israel occupied Gaza in 1967, and Madiha was scared that her husband or teenager children might be killed or jailed, as happened in 1956 when she lost two of her brother. She urged Ibrahim to leave the house, and he told her where to go. And then she tells him where to go, and then he tells her, but who would protect the house and you? And she said, I would do it. So, I mean, this is strength this resilience, these abilities, as I said, it speaks volume about women strength and abilities and contributions, and it's an empowering, just to put it in the simplest form. So in The White Lie, Madiha uncovers a virgin that is long excluded from mainstream discourse and invite readers to imagine once upon a time Palestine. She was born in the early 20s when Palestine was still part of the British Empire under colonization. And Mediha would resort to trick her dad in order to allow her to join a teacher training school in Ramallah, and that trick would change her life forever because she's so much, wanted to pursue higher education. And this is why we call this story A White Lie. The rest of the details about the story is in the story of A White Lie. And we chose her to be the first narrative in this series, as her life experience overlaps with and unites all of women represented in the series. And to large extent, in fact, her life journey communicates the collective Palestinian story. As indigenous women from Gaza, Madiha would open her arms wide and heart to the influx of refugees who ended in Gaza, later on to be married to one of those refugees, Ibrahim Abu Sitta, a national figure, a lawyer who became a magistrate, and then the first mayor of Khan Yunis under the Egyptian administration. And then in 1956, Madiha would taste the bitterness taste of exile, because she went to visit Egypt with Ibrahim, and then Gaza has been attacked during the Suez Canal crisis, and it has been occupied, and Madiha would lose two of her brothers, slaughtered, civilians, 17 years old and 21 or 22 teachers, and her dad has to bury them. So she tasted this bitterness of exile, not being able to return twice. This time in 1970, during the Black September, when her brother-in-law went missing, and then later on to know that he was murdered by the Jordanian regime during the Black September in 1970. In 1967, then Israel would occupy the Gaza Strip. Ibrahim would be deported with other community leaders, and she would be separated from her husband, and being a single mother to raise 9 kids, trying to shelter them and provide them with the best opportunities for education. So this is why I'm saying it communicates and corresponds to all the story or overlaps of the stories of women. But the most important maybe thing that I was really surprised to know, and think that as people in living in Gaza under the occupation, you're busy with daily life, so you really miss these important events, or let's say things or initiatives that happen. And this is here I am really relating to Madiha being the driving force behind finding schools for refugee children in 1948, when, as I said, 200,000 refugees ended in Gaza Strip. So the place could not absorb these places. So she was every day returning from her school and passing by those refugees under the trees, on the beaches, and seeing the small girls looking in the garbage to find any wood to bring to their families to make a fire to cook. Soft girls, dignified girls, and Madi has moved like her dad, who was every day bringing a sack of flour, making a bread, distributing to the people. But Madiha thought above and beyond this, a small thing of providing food or shelter. And she had this idea of opening a school to those refugees, thinking that this is going to be temporary. And then she would try to spread the word by sending the leaflets, first speaking with Gaza civil society, and most of them men. How would you do it? She said, I would do it. Distributing the leaflets, and then thinking maybe not all the refugees are able to read. Then she would go house to house and telling them, you know, there is a chance that your children could learn till you return to your home. But where would we find a place or a school to have these people? And then she would go to Quakers before UNRWA, you know, or any even international organization stepped into Gaza and convince them to provide tents in order for those refugees to have, you know, classes. And the story, you know, goes on of ending with 1,500 students, dividing them into 4 schools with 2 shifts in the morning, 2 shifts in the afternoon, convincing the families to, you know, now the issue is how to find teachers for this number of people. And then she started to think, yeah, students graduate from 7th grade, so she looked for the clever graduate students, and also the students who used to attend the teacher training school, but they couldn't now because of the war, the first year college, second year college, and she would recruit them, convincing the families that so hopefully they would get some training and later get a job, and bringing her sister with her who was attending the college at that time. So people see, you know, if she bringing her sister, then definitely might be, you know, a reward after that, or let's help, or whatever, what were in the minds of the people. So this is Mariha. I know time is running, and I talked perhaps more than I should, but let me end with the poem that Madiha wrote. I want her voice to be the one we hear, Madiha and all the Palestinian women. Um, Her poem, written 70 years ago, still accurately portrays the current situation in occupied Palestine and besieged Gaza. It summarizes the agony of Palestinians, their yearning of freedom, and their daily suffering under occupation, siege, and apartheid. It presents Gaza, that is not just a piece of land, but a place in which a history of resistance, resilience, and sumud has formed. The poem sends an open invitation to the world, urging it to engage with her struggle, to save life and achieve justice. Madiha poem, A Bird and Other Birds. And she starts by saying, you are lucky birds, flying from tree to tree, from rose to rose. You are happy birds, singing and dancing. I cannot understand your songs. I cannot understand your language because I am imprisoned here. Please come and see my tears, my situation, my life. It's an awful life. I wish to be like you, but I can't. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much for that really powerful overview of what's motivating your book series, and a little bit of a snapshot into Madiha's life. We're just waiting for questions to come in from the audience, and as we're doing that, I am going to repeat, because I think there were some questions about the code for the book. It's U of A, one word. So U of A is University of Alberta, right? U of A, and that's the code that you'd use to get the 20% discount on the website of University of Alberta Press. Let me start with my own question as we're gathering the ones from the audience. You know, your talk was fascinating for showing the importance of oral history, especially for oppressed groups like the Palestinians. And you know, I've been reading the book, and we see as Madiha's narrative progresses in the book that there's this kind of net constraining Palestinians' mobility, and that it shrinks tighter and tighter and tighter. And so, as an editor of this volume, I'm wondering if you can tell us if there were any challenges involved in gathering the narratives of Madiha or others, you know, and really kind of illustrating what's going on with women's lives, given the context of occupation and the context of settler colonialism.
Well, in fact, countless, I would say, barriers and challenges while trying to collect and record these stories. And this explains why it took this long time of 3 years. especially the issue of mobility and issue of safety. We have to remember that this project took place during the second Intifada, when Israel used to to close the road, the main road that connects the south and the north of Gaza. It's called Salah ad-Din, with the checkpoints that would divide the strip into three parts, and you cannot move from Palestinian area to Palestinian area because of that checkpoint. So many times we have to be, stranded on these checkpoints for hours, sometimes for days and weeks, because they would close. And in fact, Madiha has talked a little bit about those issues. Sometimes you need to cancel the interview because you cannot get there. And at that point of time, there has been no cell phone that you would tell the family that you're not coming. Sometimes they are preparing good lunch for you, or they want you to join something. So it was really frustrating in both sides, not being able to communicate at that time. And at the same time, it is the issue of safety. I remember when I used to go with Barbara, for example, to Khan Yunis or Bet Hanur, even in the middle camps. And you take the story, and sometimes we return as quick as possible, because if the checkpoint closed, we are stuck and we won't be able to return to our home. And all the time I think of Barbara as a foreigner who do not, I mean, even when I was working with journalists, people would tell me usually, if something happened, here is the number to call the press in London. But with Barbara, she was not working even at that point of time. She finished her contract with the international organization she was working with, and now she is without anyone. So how would I call her family if something happened, to tell them that this is the situation? So I was really feeling all the time this responsibility to protect, and I cannot even provide this protection to myself. In one day, we went to Khan Yunis to visit my grandmother. She was one of the narrators in this story. And then we finished and Barbara returned, but I chose to sit there for another half an hour because my grandmother was a bit ill. And then at the time that I wanted to return, I found that checkpoint started to close. And that was the end of 2000, beginning of 2001, when it was a little bit loose. So it's not yet a power, not like a military post with, they still not yet progressed in controlling the strip. So I decided with another journalist to cross the road so quick. It's 200 meters and you will be able to get to the other side. And this explains sometimes you have to take these risky choices, because I have an infant 6 months old in the kindergarten or in the nursery that I have to pick. I am breastfeeding. Sometimes it's really difficult choices you have to make as a woman, as a researcher, as an ordinary person, in order to do small things, to return to your home. And now again, it's the home in the refugee camp or the rented apartment, not your own home. So things it's become really difficult, especially with mobility and safety and checkpoints and bombardment that could happen in any minute. Another incident when I was in Beit Hanun and the invasion started to happen and the people rushed. You have to leave the village so quick. And Barbara, everyone is thinking about Barbara as a foreigner. And then we had a flat tire. Min has to fix it so quick, and we have to use another road than the main road to get out. And Basim, one of the characters of the story, would accompany us. I mean, really the kindness, the generosity of the people, that Barbara was in tears. You are endangering my life to rescue my life. So yeah, this is a little bit of these barriers or challenges we had when we were collecting the stories.
And also a thanks to Professor Moshe Madavi for the support of this conference, the department, or this webinar, the Department of Political Science, and then also to Neria Casanova and Asan Kashfi, who behind the scenes have been helping with the technical work for the webinar. I hope we answered most of the questions that were there, and the conversation will no doubt continue, but I'll leave it there and say Happy International Women's Day to everyone, and stay safe.